The research station floated in the dark space beyond Earth's moon, its silver hull reflecting the distant sunlight. Inside the main laboratory, senior researcher Zexthara stood before a massive display screen, her crystalline body glowing with soft blue light. The tall alien's forearms moved across the control panels with practiced ease as she prepared for the most important study of her career. "Are you ready to begin the assessment?" Zexthara asked, turning to face her team. Her voice carried the musical quality common to her species, but today it held notes of excitement and curiosity. Kremen, the diplomatic liaison from the Ashanti worlds, nodded eagerly. His blue skin shimmered as he adjusted his position in the specially designed chair. "My people have been waiting for this moment for decades. A new species to welcome into the galactic community." The third member of their team, Vorthak from the warrior planet Drakmor, grunted his agreement. His massive frame and thick gray skin made him look intimidating, but his species had evolved past violence centuries ago. The preliminary scans show they have developed space travel technology. They may be ready for contact soon. Zexthara activated the main scanner array and the display screen flickered to life. The blue and green planet below filled the view, its surface covered in swirling white clouds. "Earth," she said, reading from her notes. "Third planet from their star. The inhabitants call themselves humans. What do we know about them so far?" Kremen asked, pulling up his own data tablet. "Basic biological scans show they are carbon-based. Similar to most species we have encountered. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, and appear to be social creatures living in large groups." Zexthara paused to read more data. "Their technology level suggests they are in the early stages of planetary expansion." Vorthak leaned forward in his chair. "Have they developed faster than light travel yet?" "No, but they have primitive space stations and have sent exploratory missions to their moon and nearby planets." Zexthara brought up several images of human spacecraft. "Their technology is advancing rapidly." "Excellent," Kremen said, his skin brightening with pleasure. "That means they may be ready for first contact within the next few decades. We should begin the standard cultural assessment immediately." The standard cultural assessment was a process the Galactic Council had perfected over thousands of years. By intercepting a species' communications and entertainment broadcasts, they could learn about their society, values, and potential threat level before making contact. Most species followed similar patterns of development, making the assessment routine. "Beginning signal intercept now," Zexthara announced, her fingers dancing across the controls. The massive dish arrays on the research station turned toward Earth, focusing on the planet's electromagnetic emissions. Within minutes, the station's computers began processing thousands of signals. Television broadcasts, radio transmissions, and internet communications flooded into their systems. The translation computers worked to decode the various human languages, focusing on the most common ones. "I am detecting multiple language groups," Zexthara reported, watching the data streams flow across her screen. "The dominant language appears to be something called English, but there are hundreds of others. That is normal for a developing species," Kremen noted. "Most worlds have multiple languages until they achieve global unity." The first translated broadcasts began appearing on their screens. News programs, weather reports, and entertainment shows provided a window into human daily life. The aliens watched with growing interest as they observed human cities, families, and social structures. "They appear to be quite advanced socially," Vorthak observed, watching a human news broadcast about a charity drive to help disaster victims. "They show compassion for their fellow beings." "Yes, this is very promising," Kremen agreed. "They have art, music, and literature. They care for their young and elderly. They even show concern for other species on their planet." Zexthara nodded, making notes on her tablet. "They have developed complex governments and trade systems. They appear to value education and scientific advancement." For several hours, the team watched human broadcasts with growing optimism. The humans seemed to fit the pattern of most species ready for galactic contact. They had moved beyond simple survival needs and were beginning to explore concepts of universal cooperation and peace. Wait, Zexthera said, pausing as a new data stream caught her attention. I am detecting a large archive of historical documentation. This could provide valuable insight into their cultural development. The archive belonged to Dr. Lisa Martinez, a human anthropologist who had spent years collecting and digitizing historical records for her university. Her work focused on documenting human conflicts throughout history, preserving the records for future study. Historical records are always useful, Kreeman said. They show how a species has evolved socially and ethically over time. Zexthara began downloading the archive, not knowing that she was about to access the most comprehensive collection of human warfare documentation ever assembled. The files contained detailed accounts of battles, strategies, and conflicts spanning thousands of years of human history. The archive is quite large, she noted, watching the download progress. This Dr. Martinez has been very thorough in her documentation. Humans seem to value their history, Vorthak observed. This is another positive sign. Species that learn from their past are more likely to make wise decisions about their future. As the download completed, Zexthara prepared to begin analyzing the historical records. The team settled in for what they expected to be a routine examination of human cultural development, from primitive beginnings to their current state of relative peace and prosperity. Shall we begin with their earliest recorded history? Zexthara asked, her finger hovering over the control to open the first file. Yes, Kreeman said, his skin glowing with anticipation. Let us see how these humans have grown as a species. Zexthara opened the first file, expecting to find the usual records of early agricultural development and simple trade disputes. Instead, the screen filled with detailed accounts of ancient battles, complete with tactical diagrams and casualty reports. None of the three aliens were prepared for what they were about to discover about the true nature of humanity. The first file opened with a detailed account of something called the Battle of Thermopylae. Zexthara read the translation aloud, her voice becoming quieter with each sentence. 300 Spartan warriors held off an army of over 100,000 Persian soldiers for 3 days. Kreeman shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That seems like an unusual historical event. Perhaps it is mythology rather than fact. No, Zexthara said, checking the data classification. This archive contains verified historical records. The humans have cross-referenced these events with multiple sources. Vorthak leaned forward, his warrior background making him more interested than alarmed. 300 against 100,000? That is impressive tactical thinking, even if the numbers seem impossible. The file contained detailed descriptions of the battle tactics, including how the Spartans used the narrow mountain pass to their advantage. But what disturbed the aliens most was the casual way the human historian described the massive loss of life. Thousands of soldiers died in just 3 days, and the account treated this as a normal part of warfare. Let us look at another file, Zexthara said, hoping this was an unusual example. Perhaps something from a different time period. She opened the file about Roman military campaigns. The screen filled with maps showing the expansion of the Roman Empire, but the details made Kreeman's blue skin turn pale. The Romans had conquered most of their known world through constant warfare, enslaving entire populations and forcing them to fight in gladiator arenas for entertainment. They made people fight to the death for amusement? Kreeman asked, his voice barely above a whisper. According to these records, yes, Zexthara confirmed. The gladiator games were a popular form of entertainment throughout the Roman Empire. The files contained detailed descriptions of Roman military tactics, including something called a decimation, where commanders would execute every 10th soldier in a unit as punishment for cowardice. The casual brutality described in the historical records was beyond anything the aliens had encountered in their studies of other species. This must be an aberration, Vorthak said, though his confident tone was beginning to waver. All species go through violent periods in their early development. Zexthara opened another file, this one about medieval European warfare. The screen showed detailed accounts of castle sieges, crusades, and battles between kingdoms. The descriptions of weapons designed specifically to cause maximum pain and suffering made even Vorthak uncomfortable. They developed torture devices, Kremen said, reading over her shoulder. Instruments specifically designed to cause prolonged agony. The medieval period showed humans had not only continued their violent tendencies, but had refined them into an art form. The records described elaborate siege engines, chemical weapons made from burning oil and tar, and battle tactics that prioritized psychological terror over quick victory. "Look at this," Zexthara said, pointing to a section about the 100 Years' War. "They fought for over a century. Multiple generations lived their entire lives during this conflict." The team continued reading through the files, each new period revealing more sophisticated methods of warfare. The Renaissance brought gunpowder weapons. The Industrial Age introduced mass production of military equipment, and each advancement in human technology seemed to be immediately applied to more efficient ways of killing. "I need to access a documentary series," Zexthara said, finding a reference to a human historian named Jake Thompson. "This might provide better context for these events." She activated the video feed, and Jake Thompson's calm voice filled the laboratory. The human historian stood in front of a map of Europe, explaining the tactics used in the Battle of Hastings with the same tone a teacher might use to describe mathematics. The Norman cavalry charge was designed to break the Saxon shield wall. Thompson explained, pointing to animated diagrams showing thousands of soldiers colliding in brutal combat. The resulting casualties were enormous on both sides, but the tactical innovation would influence European warfare for centuries. What disturbed the aliens most was Thompson's matter-of-fact delivery. He discussed the deaths of thousands of soldiers as if he were describing weather patterns, showing no emotional reaction to the massive loss of life he was documenting. "He speaks of this carnage as if it were a scientific experiment," Kremen observed, his skin now a sickly gray color. The documentary continued with Thompson describing the evolution of medieval weapons technology. He explained how crossbows were developed to penetrate armor, how catapults were designed to destroy castle walls, and how knights developed increasingly heavy armor to protect themselves from increasingly deadly weapons. "This represents an arms race," Vorthak said, his military training helping him understand the implications. "Each advancement in protection led to developments in offensive capability." "But this is not normal," Zexthara said, making notes on her tablet. "Most species develop defensive technologies to protect themselves from natural disasters or environmental threats. These humans were developing weapons specifically to kill other humans." The documentary moved on to describe the Crusades, religious wars that lasted for centuries. Thompson explained how entire populations were mobilized for warfare, how children were trained as soldiers, and how the concept of holy war was used to justify massive campaigns of conquest and killing. "They weaponized their religious beliefs," Kremen said, his voice filled with horror. "They convinced themselves that their gods wanted them to kill other humans." The team watched in growing disbelief as Thompson described battle after battle, each one involving thousands or tens of thousands of casualties. The human historian showed no signs of distress as he recounted events that would have traumatized entire populations of most galactic species. "I think we need to contact the Senior Council," Zexthara said, pausing the documentary. "This is not following the normal pattern of species development." "Wait," Vorthak said, checking the historical timeline. "These are all ancient events. Perhaps they have evolved beyond this behavior in their modern era?" "Let us check their more recent history," Zexthara agreed. Though her tone suggested she was not optimistic about what they would find, she opened a file labeled 20th Century Conflicts and immediately wished she had not. The first entry was about something called World War, and the casualty numbers made all three aliens stare at the screen in stunned silence. 16 million deaths, Kremen read aloud. "In just 4 years?" The true horror of humanity was only beginning to reveal itself. The World War I files opened with images that made Kremen immediately turn away from the screen. Endless rows of trenches stretched across muddy landscapes, filled with soldiers living in conditions that would have been considered torture on most civilized worlds. The casualty reports from single battles showed numbers that exceeded the total population of many galactic species. "The Battle of the Somme?" Zexthara read, her crystalline form dimming as she processed the information. Over 1 million casualties in a single engagement that lasted 4 months. Vorthak, despite his warrior background, found himself struggling to comprehend the scale of destruction. 1 million? That is more than the entire military force of my homeworld. The files contained detailed photographs of the battlefield aftermath. Bodies of soldiers lay scattered across cratered landscapes, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and pain. What disturbed the aliens most was that these images had been carefully documented and preserved by the humans themselves. "They photographed their own dead," Kreeman whispered, his skin now completely gray. "They kept records of this destruction." Jake Thompson's documentary continued, his calm voice describing the introduction of chemical weapons with the same tone he had used for medieval battles. Chlorine gas was first deployed on the Western Front in 1915. The results were devastating, causing soldiers to drown in their own blood as their lungs filled with fluid. The screen showed footage of soldiers wearing primitive gas masks, stumbling through toxic clouds that had turned entire sections of the battlefield into uninhabitable wasteland. Thompson explained how both sides quickly developed more deadly chemical weapons, each trying to create substances that would kill more efficiently than their enemies. "They poisoned the very air," Zexthara said, making notes with shaking hands. "They made the environment itself into a weapon." The documentary moved on to describe trench warfare tactics. Thompson showed diagrams of how soldiers would wade in underground tunnels for weeks, then charge across open ground into machine gun fire. The casualty rates for these attacks were often over 90%. Yet the humans continued to use these tactics for years. "No man's land," Thompson explained, pointing to the area between opposing trenches, a stretch of territory so dangerous that crossing it was considered suicide, yet thousands of soldiers were ordered to do exactly that. 3 junior researchers who had been observing from the back of the laboratory quietly left the room. Their species had evolved from prey animals, and the constant descriptions of predatory behavior were causing them severe psychological distress. "Perhaps we should take a break," Kreeman suggested, noticing that his colleagues were showing signs of trauma. "No," Zexthara said firmly. "We need to understand what we are dealing with. If these humans are going to become a spacefaring species, the Galactic Council must know their true nature." She opened the next file, which contained information about World War II. The opening statistics made even Vorthak stand up from his chair in shock. 70 million deaths, he read aloud, in 6 years. The World War II files contained documentation of warfare on a scale that defied comprehension. Entire cities had been destroyed by bombing campaigns. Civilian populations had been deliberately targeted, and the humans had developed weapons that could kill hundreds of thousands of people in a single blast. "They built factories specifically for killing," Kreeman said, reading about the Holocaust. "They industrialized murder." The files showed photographs of concentration camps, detailed plans for genocide, and testimonies from survivors describing atrocities that would have been considered impossible by most galactic species. The systematic nature of the killing, the bureaucratic organization of mass murder, and the clinical documentation of the process revealed a level of organized cruelty that was beyond alien comprehension. "They kept records of everything," Zexthara observed, scrolling through page after page of Nazi documentation. "They cataloged their victims, measured their efficiency, and tried to improve their methods." The documentary continued with Thompson describing the development of nuclear weapons. The screen showed footage of atomic bomb tests, mushroom clouds rising over empty deserts, and the devastating aftermath of the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. "They created weapons that could destroy entire planets," Vorthak said, his voice barely audible. "And they used them on their own kind." The footage from the atomic bomb sites showed landscapes that had been turned into radioactive wasteland, buildings reduced to shadows on the ground, and survivors suffering from radiation poisoning. Yet Thompson's narration remained calm and educational, as if he were describing natural phenomena rather than unprecedented destruction. The strategic bombing campaign against civilian targets was considered a normal part of warfare, Thompson explained. Cities like Dresden, Tokyo, and London were deliberately targeted to break enemy morale. 2 more researchers left the laboratory, unable to continue watching the documentation. One of them, a being from a species that had achieved peace through meditation and spiritual development, was seen crying in the hallway. Colonel Amy Rodriguez, Zexthara said, finding a reference to a modern human military officer. She has created training materials for contemporary warfare. Perhaps their methods have become more civilized. She accessed Rodriguez's training videos, hoping to find evidence that humans had evolved beyond their violent past. Instead, she found detailed instructions for urban combat, including how to clear buildings full of civilians, how to use human shields, and how to maximize psychological impact on enemy populations. Acceptable casualties, Rodriguez explained to her trainees, showing charts and graphs that treated human deaths as statistical variables. In urban warfare, we must accept that civilian deaths are inevitable and plan accordingly. The training video showed soldiers practicing room-to-room combat, using mock villages populated with human-shaped targets. Rodriguez calmly explained how to distinguish between combatants and civilians, but her tone suggested that the distinction was often irrelevant to the tactical situation. "They are still doing this," Kreeman said, his voice filled with horror. "This is not ancient history. They are actively training for warfare right now." The laboratory's communication system activated and urgent messages began arriving from the Galactic Council. Word of the research team's discoveries had spread through the galactic network, and other species were demanding immediate updates on the human threat assessment. "Senior researcher," came a voice from the communication panel. "This is High Command. We are receiving reports of mass resignations from your research team. Please provide an immediate status update." Zexthara looked around the nearly empty laboratory. Of the original 12 researchers, only 5 remained, and all of them showed signs of severe psychological stress. "High Command," she replied, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "We have a problem." The emergency meeting with High Command lasted 3 hours. Zexthara stood alone in the communication chamber, facing the holographic images of 12 galactic leaders who represented the most advanced civilizations in known space. Behind her, the research station felt empty and haunted, with only 4 researchers remaining from the original team. "You are telling us that this species has weapons capable of destroying their own planet?" asked Council Leader Morthak, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "And they have actually used these weapons?" "Yes, Council Leader," Zexthara replied, her crystalline form flickering weakly. "They have over 15,000 nuclear weapons currently deployed. Our calculations show this is enough to destroy all life on their planet several times over." The council members exchanged worried glances. In the thousands of years of galactic civilization, no species had ever been discovered with the capability to destroy their own homeworld. Most species developed planetary defense systems to protect against asteroid impacts or solar flares, but humans had created weapons specifically to kill other humans on a massive scale. "Perhaps they maintain these weapons as a deterrent," suggested Council Member Villana from the Peaceful Centauri system. "Many species develop defensive capabilities they never intend to use." "That is what we hoped," Zexthara said, calling up the next set of files. "But our deeper analysis reveals something far more disturbing." She activated a new video feed showing footage from recent human military exercises. The screen filled with images of soldiers moving through training scenarios, their movements precise and deadly. What caught the aliens' attention was not the violence itself, but the efficiency and coordination of the human forces. "They are not just maintaining these capabilities," Zexthara explained. "They are actively improving them." This footage shows training exercises from last month. The video showed human soldiers working together in small units, communicating through hand signals and electronic devices. They move through simulated urban environments, clearing buildings and neutralizing targets with mechanical precision. What disturbed the council most was the obvious care and planning that went into the training. "They are thinking beings," Councilmember Draker observed, his scaled face showing confusion. "They demonstrate intelligence, cooperation, and strategic planning, yet they use these gifts to perfect methods of killing." "There is more," Zexthara said, accessing files from Dr. Kevin Walsh, a human psychiatrist who specialized in treating soldiers. "We intercepted medical conferences where they discussed the psychological effects of warfare on their own species." The screen showed Walsh addressing a room full of medical professionals, discussing something called post-traumatic stress disorder. His clinical explanations of how human minds processed extreme violence revealed another disturbing truth about the species. "They know that warfare damages their own people," Walsh explained to his audience. "Combat exposure causes lasting psychological trauma in most individuals. Yet our species continues to engage in warfare despite understanding these consequences." The aliens listened as Walsh described the various ways humans adapted to extreme stress. He explained how soldiers learned to function in environments that would drive most species insane, how they developed coping mechanisms for witnessing and participating in massive violence, and how they often returned to civilian life carrying invisible wounds that lasted for decades. "They damaged themselves," Kreeman said, speaking for the first time since the emergency session began. His blue skin had taken on a permanent gray tinge, and his voice carried a hollow quality that worried his colleagues. "They know warfare hurts them, but they continue to do it anyway. The psychological profiles are unlike anything we have encountered," Zexthara continued. "Humans appear to be capable of extreme violence while simultaneously maintaining empathy, creativity, and social bonds. This combination should be impossible." She showed the council examples of human art and literature created during wartime. Soldiers wrote poetry about the beauty of nature while living in trenches. Artists created paintings celebrating peace while their cities were being bombed. Musicians composed symphonies about love and hope while their countries were engaged in total war. "They create beauty in the midst of destruction," Council Leader Morthak said, his tentacles now still with shock. "They maintain their humanity even while engaging in inhuman acts." The most disturbing revelation came from recent military medical files. The screen showed human medics running into active combat zones to treat wounded soldiers, often exposing themselves to deadly fire to save their comrades. The footage showed acts of incredible courage and compassion occurring simultaneously with acts of devastating violence. "They risk their lives to save others," Zexthara explained. "Even in the middle of battle, they maintain ethical guidelines about treating the wounded and protecting civilians." The council watched footage of human soldiers sharing food with enemy prisoners, medics treating wounded opponents, and commanders making difficult decisions to minimize civilian casualties, even when it put their own forces at risk. The contradiction between their capacity for violence and their adherence to moral principles created a paradox that challenged everything the galactic community thought they knew about intelligent life. "This is not possible, Council Member," Valana said, her voice filled with disbelief. "No species can maintain such contradictions. They should either evolve past violence or be consumed by it." "Yet here is the evidence," Zexthara replied, showing more files. "They have rules for warfare. They have international laws governing how conflicts should be conducted. They prosecute their own soldiers for war crimes. They provide medical care to their enemies." The council fell silent as they processed this information. Every other species in galactic history had followed predictable patterns of development. Peaceful species remained peaceful. Aggressive species either destroyed themselves or evolved beyond violence. But humans seem to exist in a permanent state of controlled aggression, capable of incredible violence while maintaining strict ethical boundaries. "What is your recommendation?" Council Leader Morthak asked finally. Zexthara looked at the data one more time, hoping to find some explanation that would make the situation less alarming. Instead, she found files showing human space programs, their plans for interplanetary colonization, and their rapid advancement in technology that could easily be adapted for military use. They are less than 50 years away from achieving interstellar travel, she said. When they do, they will bring these capabilities with them. The silence in the communication chamber stretched for several minutes as the council members contemplated the implications. Finally, Council Leader Morthek spoke. The words that everyone was thinking. We may need to evacuate this entire sector of the galaxy. 3 days after the emergency council session, Zexthara found herself alone in the research station's main laboratory. The last of her colleagues had requested immediate transfer to other projects, leaving her to complete the final assessment. The silence felt heavy around her as she prepared to access the most recent human military files. Final log entry, she spoke into the recording device. Senior researcher Zexthara conducting final analysis of species designation. Human. Research team reduced from 12 members to 1 due to psychological trauma and resignation requests. She activated the display screen and opened the newest files, hoping against hope that she might find something to contradict her growing fears. Instead, she discovered footage from Captain Lisa Davis, whose recent military exercises had been captured by their surveillance equipment. The video showed Davis leading a squad through a complex training scenario. What immediately caught Zexthara's attention was not the tactical precision or the lethal efficiency of the human soldiers, but something far more unsettling. Davis was simultaneously coordinating a combat operation while maintaining constant communication about civilian safety protocols. Team Alpha, you have civilians in Building 3. Davis spoke into her radio while directing her soldiers through the simulated urban battlefield. Use non-lethal methods for extraction. Team Beta, confirm your rules of engagement before entering the school zone. Zexthara watched in fascination and horror as the human soldiers demonstrated something that should have been impossible. They moved through the training area with deadly precision, neutralizing enemy targets with ruthless efficiency. Yet they consistently showed restraint when encountering simulated civilians. Target acquired, one soldier reported. Hostile is using human shields, requesting permission to wait for clear shot. Negative, Davis replied immediately. Find an alternative approach. Civilian safety takes priority. The squad spent 20 additional minutes developing a complex flanking maneuver to avoid civilian casualties. Even though it put their own forces at greater risk, they could have completed the mission in minutes using overwhelming force, but their adherence to ethical guidelines made them choose the harder path. They make themselves vulnerable to protect others, Zexthara said into her recording device. Even in training scenarios, they prioritize the safety of non-combatants over their own success. She continued watching as Davis conducted a debrief session with her soldiers. The human commander analyzed their performance with the same attention to detail that other species might use for scientific research, but her focus remained split between tactical effectiveness and ethical conduct. Rodriguez's team completed the objective 3 minutes faster, Davis told her squad, but they failed to properly secure the civilian evacuation route. Speed means nothing if we cannot protect innocent lives. The recording device captured Zexthara's growing confusion as she struggled to understand how a species could maintain such contradictions. The humans were clearly apex predators, evolved for violence and competition, yet they had developed moral frameworks that often worked against their tactical advantages. She accessed the final piece of evidence that would determine her recommendation to the Galactic Council. The file contained humanity's space exploration programs, their plans for interstellar colonization, and their proposed protocols for contact with alien civilizations. First contact protocols, she read aloud from a document created by human scientists. In the event of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, all military personnel are to be kept at minimum safe distance. Diplomatic teams will consist of scientists, linguists, and cultural specialists. No weapons are to be displayed or mentioned during initial contact phases. The document outlined detailed procedures for peaceful contact, including plans for cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and gradual integration of alien perspectives into human society. It was exactly the kind of forward-thinking diplomacy that the Galactic Council hoped to see from developing species, yet Zexthara knew that the same humans who wrote these peaceful protocols were also maintaining arsenals capable of destroying worlds. The same species that planned for diplomatic contact was actively training soldiers for increasingly efficient warfare. They are preparing for both peace and war, she recorded. They hope for friendship but plan for conflict. This dual nature makes them unpredictable in ways that our models cannot account for. She opened her communication channel to the Galactic Council for the final time. The holographic images of the council members appeared before her, their expressions showing the strain of the past few days of deliberation. Council Leader Morthak, she began, I have completed the final assessment. My recommendation is immediate implementation of Protocol 7. A collective gasp echoed through the communication chamber. Protocol 7 had never been used in galactic history. It called for the complete evacuation of an entire stellar region and the establishment of a permanent quarantine zone around a potentially dangerous species. You are certain of this recommendation? Morthek asked, his tentacles now completely. Still, humans represent something we have never encountered before, Zexthara replied. They are apex predators who have retained their hunting instincts while developing advanced technology and complex moral systems. They are capable of both incredible compassion and devastating violence, often simultaneously. She transmitted her complete analysis to the Council, including the military training footage, the medical psychological studies, and the peaceful contact protocols. The contradiction inherent in every aspect of human civilization painted a picture of a species that defied every model of intelligent development. They are not evil, she continued. In many ways, they are admirable. But they are dangerous in ways we cannot predict or control. When they achieve interstellar travel, they will bring capabilities that could reshape galactic civilization. The Council spent several hours reviewing her evidence before reaching their unanimous decision. Council Leader Morthak delivered the final verdict with visible reluctance. Protocol 7 is hereby activated. All galactic civilizations are to evacuate this stellar region within 1 standard year. A quarantine zone of 50 light-years radius will be established around the Sol system. Humanity is to be monitored from extreme distance only. As the communication ended, Zexthara began the process of shutting down the research station. The automated monitoring probes would continue to observe humanity from safe distances, but no direct contact would ever be attempted on Earth below. Dr. Lisa Martinez finished uploading the last files of her historical warfare archive to the university database. She had no way of knowing that her academic work had just convinced an entire galactic civilization to flee to another part of the universe rather than risk meeting her species. The research station departed Earth's orbit 3 hours later, leaving only empty space and distant mechanical observers to watch humanity's continued evolution. In the depths of space, an entire galactic community held its breath, waiting to see what the most dangerous species in the universe would do next. Humanity remained alone, unaware that they had already passed their first contact examination with results that terrified their potential neighbors beyond all measure.